Hey guys, this is Hassan, and I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the ethmoid bone, which will be question 17 from section A. Although the ethmoid bone may seem like a small bone, it plays a very important role in the nasal cavity, and there's a lot of parts to it. So it's not as simple as it looks, but it is pretty easy to understand if you go over it a few times. So let's start off by looking at the ethmoid bone from the superior view. Right from the beginning, guys, just in the beginning, I want to apologize for shaking the camera too much. Just bear with me, guys. So right here in the middle of the ethmoid bone, when you look at it from a superior view, you're going to notice something in the middle protruding upwards, and that's going to be your crista galli. Now, the crista galli is going to be important for the attachment of the falx cerebri of the dura mater. Now, on each side of the crista galli, you're going to see your two cribriform plates with the cribriform foramina, which will have passage for the olfactory nerves that will go to the olfactory bulbs, which will lie on the corresponding cribriform plates, okay, on each side. And I just want to go to the Netter's Atlas real quick and reference that. On page 13, if you go to the ethmoid bone, okay, on page 13, if you find it, you're going to find two foramina, the anterior ethmoidal foramina and the posterior, the anterior and the posterior ethmoidal foramina, and they'll be important for the anterior ethmoidal nerve and the posterior ethmoidal nerve and their corresponding vessels. The reason I'm pointing out these two foramina is because specifically the anterior ethmoidal foramina is important for the anterior ethmoidal nerve of the nasociliary nerve of the ophthalmic, because the anterior ethmoidal nerve is going to go through the anterior ethmoidal foramina, through the cribriform plate, and into the nasal slit to enter the nasal cavity. Okay, so that's one thing that's important in order to understand the cranial nerves. So now we're going to look at the ethmoid from the posterior view. I just want to get one thing right off the bat. You have your perpendicular plate, okay, which is going to be used to form the superior part of the nasal septum, okay, and then the ethmoid is also going to have an orbital plate, which will be right here, which will be used to form the medial wall of the orbit, okay. Now, there's a few other things that I want to mention. The ethmoid bone, like I said before, is important in the nasal cavity because it forms two bony plates. You have your supranasal concha and your middle nasal concha, and also going along with those, you have your corresponding supranasal meatus, which lies under the supranasal concha, and your middle nasal meatus, which lies under the middle nasal concha. Okay. Now, the middle nasal concha has an opening, okay, through the ethmoidal infundibulum, which is right here, this space right here, number 17. The ethmoidal infundibulum is very important because it allows passageway for the middle nasal concha for its mucinous material to drain, and it also is the opening for the frontal sinus, the maxillary sinus, and the anterior ethmoidal cells. Now, the ethmoid bone has three types of cells. You have your anterior ethmoidal cell, you have your middle ethmoidal cells, and you have your posterior ethmoidal cells. Okay, each of them have their different openings, and they're all located in the ethmoidal labyrinth. Okay, now specifically right here, 17, the anterior ethmoidal cells are going to open here, and because the middle ethmoidal cells open in the same place as the anterior ethmoidal cells, the middle ethmoidal cells are also going to open here. So once again, opening here, you're going to have your frontal sinus, maxillary sinus, anterior and middle ethmoidal cells. Okay? Now, between this area, okay, on each side, you have the ethmoidal bulla, okay, number 15, which is a large protruding anterior ethmoidal cell, and it's going to basically, bulli is going to narrow the wide opening for the maxillary sinus, and then you have your uncinate process, which is going to project posteriorly and inferiorly and go across the opening of the maxillary sinus. Now let's get another view. Let's try looking at the ethmoid from the right. Okay, you have your crista galli, you have your nasal septum, you have your orbital plate, and then you have your anterior, middle, and posterior ethmoidal cells. Okay, they have their different openings. The posterior ethmoidal cells is going to open into the superior nasal meatus. And then, as we talked before, the ethmoidal infundibulum, right here, is going to come down and go this way, and is going to go towards 18. Okay. Now, 18 is the the hiatus semilunaris, which is a narrow opening between the narrow opening for the ethmoidal infundibulum. So the hiatus semilunaris is the opening for the ethmoidal infundibulum in between the uncinate process and the ethmoidal bulla. Okay, and that pretty much sums up your ethmoidal bone. But if you wanted to visualize the superior nasal concha and the middle nasal concha, 13 and 14, better, all you have to do is take off the ethmoid. You take off this side, you would have to take off the nasal septum, and then you'd be able to visualize this. So if you're looking this way, you take off this part, you take off the nasal septum, and then boom, you're left with this, okay? Let's just get a few different looks at the ethmoidal bone. Let's try looking at how the perpendicular plate forms the superior part of the nasal septum. If you guys go to page 8 in the Netter's Atlas, you can see the ethmoid bone, you have a crista galli, and you have your perpendicular plate for the ethmoid. Okay. If you go down, you can also see that the ethmoid forms the superior and middle nasal concha, and you see that the inferior nasal concha, it's by its own, it's its own individual bone. And then you flip to page number 4, okay, and you go to the orbit, and you can see that the ethmoid bone has the orbital plate for the medial wall of the orbit. And then just one more look in the nasal cavity. If you go to your internals book for themes, if you look in the nasal cavity, this is a different view. Right here you have your frontal sinus, you have your sphenoidal sinus, your sphenoid body, you have your superior nasal conchae, and you just have everything we discussed before. You know, you have the sphenoidal sinus opening into the sphenoethmoidal recess right here, which is going to be posterior to the supranasal concha and anterior to the sphenoid body, and you're going to have your posterior ethmoidal cells covering the opening for the sphenoidal sinus. You're going to have your hiatus semilunaris right here, number 8. You're going to have 9, which will be your uncinate process, I believe. That is correct. And you're going to have 10, which is right here. You see how this is narrowing the maxillary sinus opening. So number 10. And like I said before, the hiatus semilunaris is the opening right between the ethmoidal bulla and the uncinate process. And you have your middle nasal meatus just right here, opening into the hiatus semilunaris. And just another picture. It just shows how the sinuses open. Like we talked about, the sphenoidal sinus opens in the sphenoethmoidal recess. The frontal sinus and the maxillary sinus are going to open in the ethmoidal infundibulum and then into the hiatus semilunaris. Okay? And those are just a few different looks, because I always think it's important to look at a bone from different looks and talk about different things, just so the visual aids stick in your mind.